Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Constructing Kingdoms with the Violet Howler, a literary analysis of the Kingdom Hearts story. To start off this new batch of episodes, I want to talk about something that doesn't really get discussed much, if ever, when I see people analyzing the series. Why Roxas and Naminé are different from other nobodies on a narrative level. Because while every other nobody and their original self are portrayed as one singular character, the series repeatedly emphasizes that Roxas and Naminé are separate, distinct people from Sora and Kairi. Yet not once have I ever seen any fans of the series question why the developers decided to do that in the first place. Because the writers could have easily just not given Roxas and Kairi nobodies in the first place, and just made Roxas and Naminé as independent characters, or written the rules of nobody creation in a way that didn't leave the births of Roxas and Naminé as exceptions. So the fact that neither of those options are what the writers went with implies that there's something that nobodies represent within the overall themes of the series that makes it essential for Sora and Kairi to each have one despite the circumstances not fitting the rules the developers chose to go with. Thus, in today's episode, we're going to talk about how nobodies are created, what that process represents in terms of the story's themes, and how Sora and Kairi's individual character arcs line up with that theme to explain why Roxas and Naminé are separate people.
Looks like my summer vacation is over.
As the series reminds us, nobodies are empty bodies left behind when a person's heart is lost to darkness. The more strong-willed the person was when they were a complete person, the more human they look as a nobody. In those cases, with very few exceptions, the only meaningful difference between a nobody and the original person is the lack of an ability to feel emotions. Something which later games reveal is only a temporary condition. Because through time and connections with other people, nobodies are able to grow a new heart to replace the one they lost and gradually regain the ability to feel. And if a nobody is killed, then as long as the corresponding Heartless is killed as well, the original person is resurrected. When that happens, the recompleted person retains the memories of their life as a nobody, and as far as we know, any new heart they may have started growing beforehand appears to seamlessly merge with their original one. Which is similar to how the showrunners of Voltron Legendary Defender described the scene where Shiro's spirit is transferred into the body of his clone at the end of Season 6, of two identical versions of the same character merging into a single consciousness with both sets of memories, instead of two different characters sharing one body. As I've talked about in previous videos, darkness in Kingdom Hearts represents the absence of connection with others. But it is also shown to be generated by and drawn to strong negative emotions. Anger, fear, sadness, despair, loneliness, hatred, grief. In that context, a person's heart being lost to darkness represents feeling such emotions so strongly that it literally consumes them. Which the digital version of Roxas references in his conversation with Data Sora in Recoded, when he says that carrying hurt in your heart for a long enough period can lead to a person's heart being overtaken by darkness. And when you look at the details we know behind the creation of almost every named nobody, the common element is that the transformation from human to nobody happened either during or soon after an incident of intense physical or emotional pain. Dream Drop Distance opened with Xehanort stabbing Braig in the chest, with Braig's comments at the beginning of the scene implying that the circumstances of Ansem's other apprentices becoming nobodies were similar. Which includes Lee and Aiza as well, who were part of the apprentice crew and specifically ended up in that situation as a reaction to the disappearance of their unnamed friend, Subject X. Meanwhile, Naminé and Roxas were born when Sora forcibly unlocked his heart in order to release Kairi's and wake her up from the coma she'd been in since her heart flew into his after it was forced out of her body during the destruction of their home. When you look at the lore surrounding nobodies from the perspective of darkness as a representation of pain, the entire concept is essentially a metaphor for how people react to trauma. Their inability to feel emotions represents how some people respond to traumatic experiences by shutting down emotionally. And the growth of a new heart through connecting with others symbolizes the importance of getting support from other people in order to aid their recovery. Because to quote Baymax's words about grief,
"Those who suffer a loss require support from friends and loved ones."
In that context, Naminé and Roxas existing separately from their somebodies during Chain of Memories and Days, as well as their growth into separate people, represents how some people respond to traumatic situations by repressing their pain, blocking out the memory of what happened or denying its effect on them in order to avoid confronting what happened. In Kingdom Hearts, Kairi outright denies remembering any of her life in Radiant Garden before she arrived on Destiny Islands, and hardly ever talks in detail about how she feels regarding the events happening around her at any point in the series. And as I've talked about in multiple previous videos, Sora consistently hides his hurt and sadness behind a smile, and never truly takes the chance to let himself process those feelings. So within the Kingdom Hearts narrative, Roxas and Naminé are essentially another representation of the concept of the shadow from Jungian psychology that I talked about in previous videos. Which, for those who need a refresher, represents the aspects of a person's psyche that they don't want to acknowledge in themselves and project onto others instead, because admitting that those traits are a part of them would be upsetting. Chain of Memories even blatantly spells this out under the pretext of hinting at Naminé's origins and foreshadowing Roxas' existence. Vexen refers to Roxas' memories that he used to create the world card for Twilight Town as coming from the other side of Sora's heart, which lines up perfectly with how a shadow is considered a hidden other side of a person's psyche. Meanwhile, Naminé outright refers to herself as Kairi's shadow. And when you look closely, Roxas and Naminé's lives up to Kingdom Hearts 2 have clear parallels to the things that their respective somebodies have gone through. As a 5-year-old, Kairi's home was overrun by shadowy monsters, and her body captured by someone who wanted to use her for their own sinister agenda. When she woke up, she was in an unfamiliar place, completely cut off from everyone she knew and loved. Sora and Riku became friends with her soon afterwards, and she gradually found happiness on Destiny Islands once she settled in. But as the three of them got older, Kairi became afraid of drifting apart from Sora and Riku, and tries to hold on to the old status quo as much as possible. She never wants to be apart from them longer than she absolutely has to, going along with the raft plan in Kingdom Hearts 1 because she doesn't want to be left behind more than any desire to explore herself, and asking Sora in multiple ways to spend every day with her. All of this makes sense when you think about what Kairi must have gone through when Radiant Garden fell. After such a painful change that tore her away from her grandmother and everyone else in her old life, it would make sense that the new relationships she formed in her new environment would give her a sense of comfort and security. So it's understandable why she'd be so invested in holding on to them. But as I explained in my breakdown of her character, this has the side effect of keeping Kairi metaphorically trapped in childhood because she's afraid of moving forward and instead focuses her energy on standing still. Then in Kingdom Hearts 1, Kairi's new home is overrun by shadowy monsters, and her body is captured by people who want to use her for their own sinister agenda. After that, Naminé wakes up in an unfamiliar place, completely cut off from everyone Kairi knew and loved. Then the organization comes along and uses Naminé to brainwash Sora into being their puppet by having her manipulate his memories until she's his most important person. Which Naminé goes along with because she's been alone since the moment she was born and almost certainly wants someone to care about her that much. With all these parallels in mind, Naminé's involvement in Chain of Memories can logically be seen as the personification of Kairi's fears and insecurities. How lonely and isolated she must have felt when she first arrived on Destiny Islands after the loss of her home in Radiant Garden. Her desperation to hold on to her bonds with Sora and Riku and cling to the status quo of their relationship. The fear that if she doesn't do what she can to hold their attention, they'll choose to leave her behind and completely forget about her, just like Sora chose to forget Naminé at the end of Chain of Memories. And arguably, some unvoiced issues with low self-esteem regarding her place in Sora and Riku's lives, as well as in the wider community of Destiny Islands. Fans have often complained about how little we hear Kairi talk about her feelings regarding the fall of Radiant Garden or the events of the series. But with these parallels in mind, Naminé essentially functions as a vehicle to show us those feelings without Kairi's other personality traits obscuring them from view. Similar to how the concept of the shadow is portrayed in Persona 4, where each character's shadow self behaves according to negative traits that the character already has, but without the positive qualities to balance them out. Yet where Kairi spends most of her screen time on the sidelines, passively waiting as the actions and opinions of others dictate her circumstances, Naminé takes matters into her own hands and actively takes charge of her own life. Kairi initially wants to go with Sora when he heads back to Hollow Bastion in the last portion of Kingdom Hearts 1, but when he tells her that she'd be in his way and that she can't come, she folds and spends the next year waiting for him to come back to her. And even after she decides in Kingdom Hearts 2 that waiting isn't enough anymore, once Riku and Sora are called away again to take their Mark of Mastery test, Kairi once again stays behind to wait on Destiny Islands while they go off on another adventure without her. Meanwhile, Naminé develops the confidence to stand up for herself over the course of Chain of Memories, and from then on repeatedly defies the wishes of those around her to pursue what she believes in, regardless of what anyone else says. From refusing to be cowed by Marluxia and Larxene despite her guilt over her involvement in Sora's memory wipe in Chain of Memories, to her repeatedly reaching out to Roxas in direct defiance of Diz's orders in the prologue of Kingdom Hearts 2. When Axel gives Naminé an opening to escape from the organization's clutches, she saves herself instead of waiting around for someone else to save her from her isolation. And where Kairi is reluctant to leave Destiny Islands, Naminé is willing to abandon the only world she's ever known without looking back in order to keep herself, Donald, Goofy, and Sora out of the organization's clutches after the end of Chain of Memories. And this is not unusual because a shadow figure doesn't automatically have to only represent negative aspects of a person's psyche. For example, in Persona 5, Futaba Sakura's shadow represents her positive feelings about herself that she repressed due to her survivor's guilt over her mother's death. So Naminé can be seen as a mirror of both the negative and positive parts of herself that Kairi has managed to repress as a response to her own trauma. Meanwhile, Sora wakes up in Traverse Town after the fall of Destiny Islands, completely alone and separated from everything and everyone he ever knew. Because he has a Keyblade, he quickly finds himself saddled with immense pressure and responsibility by the adults around him as the only person who can save the universe from the threat of the Heartless. The adults who take him in promise that going along with this job will allow him to regain what he's lost, but despite good intentions, they're still using him for their own agenda without any concern for actually honoring their promises. And he's told up front that expressing his pain and sadness makes him a burden, and the message of always smile is repeatedly reinforced over the course of the series. Sora just wants to be reunited with the people he cares about and return home to Destiny Islands with them, but he keeps being denied this because the people around him are all doing their own thing and making their own decisions without telling him anything. From Riku lashing out over feeling left behind without properly articulating why, to Donald prioritizing his own search for Mickey at the expense of letting Sora try to reunite with his best friend. So when Sora ends up in Hollow Bastion and sees Kairi trapped in a coma that only he can wake her up from, while Riku has been possessed and disappeared to who knows where, he sacrifices himself to free Kairi's heart without a second thought. Then after his revival, his mission from the end of the game onward is focused on finding Riku so that the two of them can return to their mundane life on Destiny Islands with Kairi. Meanwhile, Roxas wakes up alone in Twilight Town, completely alone and cut off from everything and everyone Sora knew, without even memories to know what he's missing. Because he has a Keyblade, he quickly finds himself saddled with immense pressure and responsibility as one of only 2 people in the organization who can collect hearts. The adults who take him in promise that going along with this job will allow him to regain what he's lost, but are ultimately just using him for their own agenda without any concern for actually honoring that promise. And all the while, he's repeatedly told that his feelings and relationships are not real. Roxas just wants to spend time with his 2 best friends, and for their status quo of hanging out and goofing around after work every day to last forever. But this keeps being denied to him because the people around him are all doing their own thing and making their own decisions without telling him anything. From Xemnas keeping him in the dark so that he's easier to control, to Axel trying to shelter him from the truth about his origins. Eventually, Roxas stops caring about his own life, outright saying nobody will miss him if the organization destroys him. He gets a brief reprieve in the form of a fake life in the virtual Twilight Town at the start of Kingdom Hearts 2, but when that too falls apart and he gets his memories back, he ends up calmly accepting his fate and sacrificing himself to awaken Sora. To underscore these similarities, Roxas and Sora both have a tendency to lash out when others push their buttons, as we see in Chain of Memories and Kingdom Hearts 2. But Roxas is more consistently open about his anger, sadness, and other negative feelings than Sora is. Because unlike Sora, Roxas had an outlet for all the stress and pressure he was dealing with, as 358 Days reveals that he kept a diary where he wrote down his thoughts and feelings as he went about his daily life. And even though he didn't have the knowledge to understand what he was feeling or why, he still used his diary to try and make sense of everything he was experiencing. Meanwhile, Sora, as I've outlined in previous videos, rarely even does that much. And when he does reflect on his experiences, he consistently downplays his feelings when it comes to the actions of his friends. 358 Days showed us, through Roxas, how badly Sora was hurt by Riku stealing the Keyblade and Donald and Goofy abandoning him in Kingdom Hearts 1. But Sora never brings it up when talking to Riku in later titles, and multiple comments throughout the series indicate that he blames Riku's antagonistic behavior on outside forces, instead of recognizing that his best friend did everything he did of his own free will. The one time he talks about that moment with Donald and Goofy, Sora acts like them leaving him was a natural and unavoidable consequence of him losing the Keyblade, instead of a choice that they consciously made to prioritize their search for Mickey above their friendship with him. And almost every time he starts acting too upset about the things happening around him, he's told to smile and stop being sad. In comparison, even when Roxas doesn't understand why Axel and Xion or any of the other organization members are treating him the way they do, he still recognizes that they are responsible for their own actions and doesn't try to downplay their choices. And even as other organization members tease Roxas for his displays of emotion thanks to Xemnas gaslighting them that their emotions aren't real, there's also never any kind of expectation for him to act a specific way like there is with Sora. As a result, Roxas is noticeably better at expressing and processing his emotions than Sora is, to the point where even other people think that Sora could learn from his example.
You should share some of that hatred with Sora. He's far too nice for his own good.
So from a psychology perspective, Roxas can be seen as a representation of how Sora feels about everything he went through in Kingdom Hearts 1, and the stress that he's under because of his responsibilities as a Keyblade wielder that he hasn't been allowing himself to process. His insistence that Roxas isn't him, while a way to acknowledge Roxas's unique personhood, could also be seen as a reflection of Sora distancing himself from acknowledging his own pain. This actually makes it pretty ironic that Roxas merging with Sora and Naminé merging with Kairi at the end of Kingdom Hearts 2 did nothing to help either somebody address the unresolved issues that their nobody represented. Because in Jungian psychology, learning to accept the parts of your psyche that your shadow represents is referred to as integrating with the shadow. On one level, the treatment of Roxas and Naminé as different characters from Sora and Kairi makes me think of an idea that I've seen a couple of times over the years about how growing and learning makes you a different person in the present than the person you were in the past. That as you grow and adapt to changing circumstances and new information, the you of today becomes a different person from the you of a month, a year, or a decade ago. Which Kingdom Hearts potentially exemplifies to an almost literal degree with all the different incarnations of Xehanort that have appeared over the course of the series. So by letting Naminé and Roxas go and recognizing them as different people, Sora and Kairi could be seen as symbolically declaring that they're ready to grow out of being the people they were when their nobodies were created in the first place. But the narrative still treating Roxas and Naminé as separate people from their somebodies, even after merging, also makes sense when you think about the other layer of symbolism to Nobody's growing new hearts that I talked about in previous videos. Because in Constructing Kingdoms Episode 11, I explained how the series' theme of the non-existent becoming real through connecting with others was rooted in a message about the importance of stories, as well as how hearts are essentially born from the stories that people have to tell about their experiences with the people and the world around them. One of the ways that people deal with trauma and emotional pain is telling or consuming fictional stories that represent what they've been through in order to process their own feelings about what happened to them, or even realize that something bad happened to them at all. And from a certain angle, the forming of a shadow figure is essentially nothing more than your mind creating a story about yourself. So in this context, Roxas and Naminé could be seen as a symbol of stories that authors write to process their own trauma by using fictional characters as avatars of themselves and their experiences, which would make their development into separate people with their own independent identities a representation of how audiences who relate to such stories form their own individual connections with them because of how those stories resonate with their experiences and make them feel seen. From that perspective, Naminé and Roxas being forced to merge with Kairi and Sora before either somebody had been able to process the emotions and trauma that the two nobodies represent can be seen as a symbol of social stigma surrounding trauma and its portrayals in fiction. Because over the last few years, I've seen an alarming number of people online who think that those who struggle with trauma should never be allowed to create anything that reflects their own experiences and should just cope in private. That only the most sanitized and censored portrayals of trauma and traumatic experiences are acceptable to show or talk about. Which only encourages people to repress their pain like Sora and Kairi have been doing, because being treated that way when they attempt to open up helps convince people that no one will ever understand their feelings or experiences. This would make Roxas and Naminé's eventual rebirth a potential reflection of Sora and Kairi overcoming that stigma, and finally being ready to start unpacking all the feelings that their nobodies represent. Which makes it incredibly meta that Sora beginning his descent on Murdoch's formula for the heroine's journey, and Kairi experiencing the awakening and preparing for the journey on Schmidt's outline, only occur after they've set their nobodies' hearts free. Effectively taking the first steps toward letting out all the feelings that they'd previously been metaphorically pouring into their nobodies. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, if you have any thoughts, observations, or counter-arguments about anything I've said here in this video, feel free to share in the comments below. And if you're interested in more literary dissections of the Kingdom Hearts narrative, feel free to click subscribe, and I'll see you back here again on February 24th for my next video.